Hollywood has told you this story before. A noble Muslim sultan, merciful and wise. An honorable Christian king, brave and chivalrous. Two great men, bound by mutual respect, fighting a war neither of them truly wanted. It's a beautiful story. It's also not the whole story. Because on the 20th of August, 1191, the English king celebrated in schoolbooks as the bravest heart in all of Europe stood on a hill outside the city of Acre and gave an order that killed close to 3,000 men, women, and children, in full view of the enemy army, over a ransom payment that hadn't arrived on time. This is the real story of Saladin and Richard the Lionheart. It's messier than the legend, it's more human than the legend, and by the end of it you'll understand exactly why history remembers both of these men as heroes, and why that's only half the truth. Stick around because the most famous chivalry story about these two men, the one you've probably heard, turns out to be partly invented. The real version is almost more interesting than the myth. Let's start with the man history calls Saladin. He was born around 1137 in Tikrit, in what is now Iraq, into a prominent Kurdish family serving the Zengid dynasty that ruled much of Syria. As a young man he was, by most accounts, an unremarkable student more interested in religious study than soldiering. That changed when he joined the staff of his uncle, a general named Shirkuh, on a military campaign into Egypt. Through a complicated three-way power struggle involving the ruling Fatimid Caliphate, Saladin found himself, almost by accident, becoming vizier of Egypt. In 1171 he formally ended the 262-year-old Shia Fatimid Caliphate and brought Egypt back under Sunni rule, aligning it with the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. By 1174 he had taken Damascus and declared himself Sultan of Egypt and Syria, founding what would become the Ayyubid dynasty. Over the following decade, through a mix of military conquest and shrewd diplomacy, he unified a patchwork of rival Muslim territories, from Egypt through Syria into parts of Mesopotamia and Yemen, under his personal control. Historians still debate which of Saladin's achievements mattered more: his battlefield record or this earlier, quieter work of unification. Uniting fractured, mutually suspicious Muslim states into a single fighting force was something none of his predecessors had managed, and some scholars argue it was the harder and more consequential accomplishment, since without it, Hattin and everything that followed would never have been possible. And that unified force was about to meet an army that had already made a fatal mistake before the fighting even started. That unified force met the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem on the 4th of July, 1187, at a place called the Horns of Hattin, near the Sea of Galilee. It was not a close fight. Saladin's roughly 20,000 troops surrounded the exhausted, dehydrated Crusader army, which had marched through open desert with almost no water, and annihilated it. King Guy of Lusignan was captured. Most of the kingdom's fighting nobility was captured or killed. And the relic Crusaders, believed to be a fragment of the true cross, carried into battle as their holiest possession, was seized and never returned to Christian hands. Hattin didn't just cost the Crusaders a battle. It cost them the army that had defended the entire kingdom for nearly 90 years, and with no one left to stop him, Saladin swept through city after city almost unopposed. Jerusalem itself fell on the 2nd of October, 1187, and this is where the popular version of the story usually leans hardest into the contrast. The brutal Christian conquest of 1099, when the first Crusaders reportedly slaughtered the city's population, versus Saladin's supposedly total mercy in 1187. The real picture is more complicated on both sides. Modern historians increasingly question just how large the 1099 massacre actually was, arguing some contemporary accounts exaggerated it for religious effect. And Saladin's mercy in 1187, while genuinely remarkable by the standards of medieval siege warfare, wasn't unconditional either. Residents were allowed to leave on payment of a ransom, 10 dinars for a man, 5 for a woman, 1 for a child, and Saladin personally helped cover ransoms for thousands of the poor who couldn't pay, over the objections of his own treasury officials. But those who genuinely couldn't raise the money, and there were thousands of them, were enslaved. It wasn't total mercy. It was, compared to what a medieval army was fully entitled to do to a captured city under the customs of the time, real and significant restraint, which is exactly why it made such an impression on Saladin's own contemporaries, including his enemies. News of this reached Europe within weeks. And the man it provoked into action is the one whose reputation is about to get a lot more complicated. News of Jerusalem's fall reached Europe within weeks, and the reaction was immediate. Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade. 3 of Europe's most powerful rulers answered: the aging Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, who drowned crossing a river in Anatolia before he ever reached the Holy Land, King Philip II of France, and King Richard I of England, better known to history as Richard the Lionheart. Richard was born in Oxford in 1157, spent most of his life and reign in his French territories rather than England itself, and had built a reputation as one of the most capable military commanders of his generation. He arrived in the Holy Land in 1191 and immediately joined the ongoing siege of the port city of Acre, which fell to the combined Crusader forces on the 12th of July that year. And this is where the story most documentaries skip past entirely. After Acre surrendered, Richard held several thousand members of the city's Muslim garrison as prisoners, intending to trade them for the return of the true cross, a payment of gold, and the release of Christian prisoners held by Saladin. A deadline was agreed. Negotiations dragged. Distrust grew on both sides, each suspicious the other was stalling for military advantage. When the deadline passed without full payment, Richard made his decision. On the 20th of August, 1191, he had the prisoners led to a hill outside Acre called Ayyadieh, in plain sight of Saladin's army and Saladin's own field headquarters, and ordered them executed. Contemporary sources differ on the exact number. The Muslim chronicler Baha ad-Din, one of Saladin's closest advisors who witnessed the aftermath directly, is generally treated by historians as the most reliable count, and his figure sits closer to 26 or 2700. Some Christian sources push the number closer to 3,000. Either way, several accounts specifically note women and children were among the dead, and even some of Richard's own Christian allies were reportedly troubled by what they'd witnessed. Many historians describe what happened at Ayyadieh in blunt terms: the mass execution of prisoners, including women and children, as a war crime by any reasonable standard, medieval or modern. Others place the decision inside the customs of medieval siege warfare, where a besieging commander who couldn't feed, guard, or safely transport a large prisoner population sometimes resorted to exactly this kind of massacre elsewhere in the period too, without it being treated as exceptional at the time. Both readings are worth knowing, because they explain why this single event still divides historians today. Saladin's response was swift and proportional in its brutality. He had roughly 2,300 Christian prisoners held in Damascus executed in turn. This is not a story that fits neatly into either the noble Saladin or heroic Richard version most people grew up with. It's simply what happened, from sources on both sides of the conflict. But 3 weeks later, Richard would do something that had nothing to do with brutality at all, and it's the closest thing in this entire war to a genuine masterclass. The war continued. On the 7th of September, 1191, Richard's army met Saladin's forces near the town of Arsuf, and here Richard genuinely earned his military reputation. Marching south along the coast toward Jaffa, keeping the sea to protect his flank, Richard held his infantry and cavalry in tight, disciplined formation under repeated harassing attacks, resisting the urge to break ranks even as pressure mounted, until the moment was right for a full cavalry charge that shattered Saladin's lines and forced a retreat. It secured the coastal route south. From Jaffa, Richard twice advanced inland toward Jerusalem itself, getting as close as 12 miles from the city in the winter of 1191 into 1192, close enough that low Muslim morale inside the city might have caused it to fall quickly. Both times, appalling winter weather, exhausted supply lines, and fear of being cut off and trapped by a relieving Muslim army forced a retreat back to the coast. Richard never saw Jerusalem. He came remarkably close, twice, and both times had to turn back. The final major clash came at Jaffa in the summer of 1192. Saladin, sensing an opportunity while Richard was away planning his return home, attacked and captured the town, though its citadel, garrisoned largely by sick and wounded troops, held out. Word reached Richard at Acre, and he responded immediately, landing by sea with a small force of roughly 80 knights and several hundred crossbowmen, wading ashore, and driving Saladin's much larger force out of the town in a fierce counterattack. It was Richard's last major battlefield success in the Holy Land, and it led directly to negotiations. The Treaty of Jaffa, signed in September 1192, ended the Third Crusade with a truce, not a conquest. Jerusalem remained in Muslim hands. Christian pilgrims were guaranteed safe passage to visit the city. The Crusader states retained a narrow strip of coastline. Neither side had won outright, and both men, by this point, likely knew it. Now, about that famous horse. The story you've probably heard isn't quite what happened, and the truth tells you more about these two men than the legend ever could. It's worth being honest about the famous chivalry stories, because most of them are real, just not quite as cinematic as popular retellings suggest. Saladin's brother, Ayyadieh, did send Richard fine Arab horses as a gift after the fighting at Jaffa, a genuine tribute to Richard's courage. But the popular version, that Saladin personally sent a fresh horse mid-battle the instant Richard's own was killed beneath him, is very likely a later embellishment layered onto a real, if less dramatic, act of respect. Contemporary chronicles from both sides do describe Saladin sending fruit and ice to Richard's camp during an illness, and some accounts describe an exchange involving physicians as well. These gestures were real, recorded by chroniclers on both sides, and they tell us something true about how these two men genuinely regarded each other, even as their armies were killing each other's people by the thousands. Historians today generally read this less as personal sentimentality and more as a shared code, an aristocratic warrior culture on both sides that valued displaying magnanimity toward a worthy opponent. That doesn't make the gestures fake. It makes them more calculated than the romantic version suggests. Saladin died on the 4th of March, 1193, in Damascus, less than a year after the treaty was signed. When his officials went to arrange his burial, they discovered he hadn't left behind enough money to pay for his own grave. Over the course of his rule, he had given away so much of his personal wealth to his subjects and to charitable causes that there was almost nothing left. Richard's own story ended less peacefully. On his way home in December 1192, traveling in disguise through hostile territory, he was recognized and captured near Vienna by Leopold V, Duke of Austria, a nobleman Richard had personally humiliated during the Siege of Acre. Leopold handed him over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, who held him for over a year and demanded a ransom of 150,000 silver marks, roughly 2 years' worth of England's entire royal income, before finally releasing him in February 1194. Richard spent his remaining years fighting to reclaim territory in France, and on the 26th of March, 1199, was struck by a crossbow bolt while besieging a minor castle called Chalais-Chabrol over a dispute involving buried treasure. The wound turned gangrenous, and he died on the 6th of April, 1199, at the age of 41, having spent perhaps 6 months of his entire 10-year reign actually inside England. So what do you do with a story like this? Two men, celebrated for centuries as models of honor and chivalry, who were also, verifiably, capable of the kind of brutality that gets left out of the movie versions. Both things are real at once. Richard's discipline at Arsuf was genuinely masterful, and his order at Ayyadieh is, by most modern historical assessments, a war crime, whatever defense medieval convention might have offered him at the time. Saladin's restraint at Jerusalem was genuinely remarkable for its era, and his retaliatory executions in Damascus were genuinely brutal. Neither man was simply the hero or simply the villain of this story. They were medieval rulers fighting a holy war neither side was fully willing to lose, capable of real magnanimity and real atrocity, sometimes within the same campaign season. That's a harder story to put on a movie poster than Noble Sultan versus Honourable King. But it's the true one, and honestly, it's more interesting. If you want more history like this, the real version behind the legend, subscribe, because there's a lot more still to uncover.